Y'all know I love to play a lot of racing games, but let's be honest, the newer stuff coming out is just not enticing me for many reasons. And I often find myself going back to older titles to try and recapture the things I love most about the genre. So I wanted to do a video where I try to come up with my own ideal racing game by using tropes from other games spanning across literally 25 years, as well as some games that aren't even racing games. So let's do this thing. Our story begins with you in a moving truck talking to the driver. You don't even have your own car yet, but you're moving to a new region. The driver makes casual chat with you, but your answers to their questions is what determines your first car. Yes, our first trope of many is an Animal Crossing trope, but I swear you need to hear me out for this one. So after you finish the small talk, the scene changes to you seeing a derelict car on the side of the road, and you decide to pick it up, trailering it to the moving truck and making off with it. So for example, your first car might be an old Honda Civic, it might be a Dodge Charger, or perhaps a BMW Z4, like an older one, not the newer Supra wannabe. But once you have your vehicle, you basically do a tutorial and learn the mechanics of driving because all good games ease the player in. You can do a few races at this time, and the game might throw you into head-to-heads as well, and then you have your first tournament. However, halfway through the tournament, the event is busted by the cops. You have your first pursuit of the game, and you have to outrun them. If you do this, then you've cleared the tutorial, and that is where the story branches out. You receive 2 emails. The first is from an underground racing team that wants you as a driver for them. And the second email is from a police officer who tries to recruit you to an undercover strike team. Whatever you pick is locked in for that first playthrough of the game. So the racer side story has a pretty basic formula. Your racing team starts with one territory, basically one area of the map similar to territories in NFS Carbon. As you complete events, head-to-heads, and running from the police, you earn bounty similar to Carbon and the Most Wanted games. Bounty is tied to both your player rank and separate bounty pools for each territory you compete in. So when your bounty in a particular territory is high enough, that automatically flips the territory for your racing team. Acquiring new territories unlocks new safe houses, new cars, and new weapons. The endgame is achieved one of 2 ways. Either you have the highest bounty in every territory across the entire map, which is a win/roll credits, or you lose your last territory, which is a game over. It's done this way for reasons we'll get into later. Now, the police side is a little similar, but also quite different. You get bounty from completing events, shutting down racers in free roam, and doing dispatch activities, more on that later. All of the same territories are there as from the racer side, but you're not competing to secure them. Instead, getting enough bounty in a territory unlocks what is known as an undercover face-off. This is where you and the head officer of that territory compete to be the first person to shut down a most wanted racer. If you win this event, you get a distinction medal in that territory. Your win/roll credits condition is to get distinctions in every territory in the game. Your game over condition is to lose distinction in all territories, including the one you start out in. So not only is it possible to game over on your first face-off, you could also game over if you fail to respond to an opponent's face-off challenge in a timely manner. Now, every time you beat the game or game over, it creates a snapshot of your progress across that playthrough. You can then pull any vehicles from a prior snapshot, continuing to improve them, but you'll start over from the first act like a new game plus every time. Additionally, from the second playthrough on, you can choose to acquire a new derelict vehicle if you want to start fresh, and the difficulty of the new run will raise or lower depending on how you did in the prior runs. It is only between runs that you could choose to flip from cop to racer or vice versa. You cannot do so in the middle of a run. And these runs can honestly be 10 to 30 hours each to either secure all territories or get your ass beat. So if you do want to end a run prematurely, you can force a surrender or retire option, But as a penalty, anything unlocked in that run is not saved to a snapshot, so use that option wisely. What you may have noticed from this description is that it's largely a single-player yet PvE endeavor, and I believe it should be because live service and MMO experiences can be very hit or miss. So to facilitate all of this, the game will have a set number of free roam drivers who play dynamically, similar to the free roam drivers in Rivals, and any of these players can quote-unquote matchmake into the events of the game at random. So there will be on each run anywhere from 32 to 64 dedicated NPC drivers that you'll compete with across the entire run from start to finish. And those will rotate from a much larger pool, so it's different every run. I would say a good number of events are designed to be 1v1, and then you have a lot of singles events where it's you versus 3 other drivers, and any 8-person event is going to be a doubles event where you have an NPC wingman, again, something we saw in NFS Carbon. On the racer side, this wingman will do the same drafter, blocker, scout stuff, and on the cop side, this person is your backup, where any shutdowns they make result in a shared bounty. So as far as online and multiplayer, you have the option to connect to someone else's closed lobby and be their wingman, which basically turns the game into a co-op campaign. Alternately, you can load into a public or custom lobby with up to 16 other people, compete to earn bounty using any car you've unlocked across any run or snapshot, but the bounty is only applied to your single-player credentials. There is no online leaderboard, no separate online campaign, because Unbound tried that and it did not go so well for them. Your player credentials card for the game keeps track of all your runs, your most used cars, your miles driven, your total bounty for cop and racer, etc, etc. If you are playing on a custom lobby, busting drivers who have a higher bounty than you gets you bounty bonuses, while busting drivers with a lower bounty than you gets you a reduced payout. But again, that's not too different from the mechanics of the single-player system, so you can spend most of your time in single-player and almost never go online if you really don't want to. And that's it for story and gameplay, so let's talk about events. On the racer side, you have your typical circuit, sprint, drag, drift, eliminator, toge, canyon duel. All of these are typical from prior racing games. You can also start head-to-head sprints in free roam, much like in Rivals. All race types have the potential to involve police. If an NPC police officer is on a route that aligns with the route of your event, 9 times out of 10, they are going to start an ambush on you. There are also speed trap and checkpoint events, like those from Carbon and Most Wanted 05. I've never really liked the free roam based speed traps or speed zones in any game, whether it's NFS, Forza, or some of the others. I'd rather it just be a dedicated event. Plus, taking them out of free roam makes the free roam a lot less cluttered. On the cop side, you have dedicated hot pursuit events like the previous NFS games, instant interceptor pursuits in free roam against a single enemy, ambush events in free roam where you can crash a multi-participant race already in progress, and you get bonus points for shutting down the race before it finishes, and the aforementioned undercover face-offs where you and another cop compete to bust a most wanted driver. Cops also have speed trap and checkpoint races, and cops also have 2 event modes which are unique to them. The first is Gauntlet, where a cop must complete a sprint or circuit loop while avoiding being hit by pursuit weapons and obstacles triggered by other cops. Gold, silver, and bronze are determined by the number of times they are hit by weapons or crash into obstacles, with failure happening if their vehicle is totaled. And the second is Dispatch, where the cop takes control of a drone or police helicopter. Drones can fire EMPs, while helicopters can drop spike strips from the air. Events are won based on the number of tech hits they make on a target or the ability to total that target's car altogether. So in a way, this is just the other half of the Gauntlet event. Now, I would argue, depending on the size of the game, the addition of off-road, boats, and planes, a la the Crew 2, could be a very good addition, but at the same time, it could also be overkill and diminish from the quality of the game in many ways. Any car can quote-unquote go off-road, it just suffers a speed and handling penalty as a result. The Crew as a series got around this by having rally raid cars not suffer a speed penalty off-road, but I honestly don't like this approach. I would rather go back to a more traditional way where you suffer only a slight speed penalty on a gravel or dirt road, and you just can't go completely off-road or off-trail at all anymore. Waterways should be accessible to boats, but instead of a fast fade system, you just go to a dock and press a button to go on water. You then have to go back to any dock to swap back to car. Boat races and boat pursuits could be really fun, but they'd be rather limited. And that just leaves aircraft. Part of the reason the Crew 1 looks better than the Crew 2 was because your FOV was always relatively fixed in the former game, meaning less complex rendering across the board. So I think in a game like the one we're proposing, cop drones and helicopters should have a fixed FOV, with drones flying slightly above the height of a standard car to go over obstacles that cars cannot, and a top speed of about 120 miles an hour. Helicopters, meanwhile, have a fixed FOV approximately 2 times higher, so they can fly over low-level trees, and they have a much faster top speed of 220 miles per hour. This should also make both vehicles handle much better than any aircraft in the Crew 2, since these would move forward in a relatively unchanging altitude. They could go over land or water, giving them access to the full map, but a technical advantage is that areas cars or boats don't go to would just have to be low render, like tree overgrowth or what have you. And again, only cops would have access to helicopters and drones. Racers would not have any aircraft at all. So we have a story, gameplay mechanics, event types, vehicle types. Let's talk about the location itself. I believe the location should be a fictional county in a mountainous or high desert geographical location. So something like Utah, Colorado, or Arizona. You would have one major city which parodies a real city, so either Salt Lake City, Denver, or Phoenix. And then you have a bunch of small towns, mountain roads, landmarks, waterways, as mentioned previously, and so forth. So as far as total area, I would say it should be way bigger than Motorfest, but way smaller than the Crew or the Crew 2. So ideally, it should be about 500 or 600 square miles, whereas the Crew and the Crew 2 were about 1,500 to 1,800. And the density scaling should be approximately 1/10 the density of a real-world city, which is the approximate density scaling of the Crew Motorfest, just as an example. Now, what can we do to make this more interesting? We could certainly have long races. We're talking 50 to 80 miles easily. We can also have races where the pathing can change mid-race, similar to the live routes of Grid 2 or the route changes of Split Second. And above all else, bring back reverse courses. I don't understand why modern racing games did away with them, but it would add a lot of variety to the game. All of this is literally the bulk of what I'd want to see in a racing game, but there are 2 more things we need to discuss: weapon systems and car customization. Racers and cops will both get weapons, that is a given. Many of these are going to be conventional and have already been seen in prior NFS games. You have your spike strips, your EMPs, your jammers, your shockwaves and electrostatic fields, and then you have other faction-specific stuff. I think that cops should have roadblocks only be route changes against racers, while racers have gate hacks which open up off-road shortcuts that immediately close back up after the racer has gone through them a la split second, meaning police and other racers cannot use them and have to take the long way around. But of course, drones and helicopters are able to just go over them. Weapons to do away with, the turbos from Rivals would definitely go away. Period. End of story. You have NOS, you do not need them. Stun mines can probably go away because spike strips are just better in general. And then between shockwaves and shock rams are forward-facing only, but they are surprisingly overpowered, so they just should not come back. As far as new weapons, racers should have access to remote hacks that can hijack civilian vehicles and have them brake check enemy racers or the police. Racers should also have the ability to hack stuff like log trucks to drop logs onto the road, which is a callback to Most Wanted 05. And final racer weapon additions should be oil slicks, which I'm surprised have never been used, and smoke screens, which could obscure like a quarter mile or so of track in a thick fog. So that's all for weapons. And the last thing is customization. It needs to be completely random. No, I'm serious. Basically have it where different parts show up in the shop on different days, dependent on the real-time clock. So you could have the best parts in stock day 1 if you're stupidly lucky, or go weeks without getting that perfect part that you need to finish your build. And as far as visual stuff, bring back auto sculpt from Carbon and Pro Street. I really think that's mostly everything I would add to make the perfect racing game, for me anyway. There might be other things to add to this, such as a dyno run similar to what Underground 2 had, or the speed breaker, which in most 1.05 allowed you to slow down time. But I think if I listed out every single thing, we'd be here all day. In any case, let me know if you play a game like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video!